Rabbit Hill by Robert Lawson. Chapter 1. New Folks Coming. All the hill was boiling with excitement. On every side there rose a continual chattering and squeaking, whispering and whistling, as the animals discussed the great news. Through it all could be heard again and again the words, "New folks coming." Little Georgie came tumbling down the rabbit burrow, panting out the tidings. "New folks coming," he shouted. "New folks coming, mother, father, new folks coming into the big house." Mother looked up from the very thin soup that she was stirring. "Well, it's high time there were new folks in the big house. High time, and I do hope they're planting folks, not shiftless like the last ones. 3 years now since there's been a good garden on this place. Never enough to put anything up for the winters, and last winter the worst in years. I don't know how we ever got through it, and I don't know how we'll ever make out if they're not planting folks. I just don't know, with food getting scarcer all the time, and no place to get a vegetable except the fat man's at the crossroads, and him with his dogs and all, and crossing the black road twice a day to get there. I just don't know. I just don't know." Mother was quite a worrier. "Now, my dear," said Father, "do try to adopt a more optimistic attitude. This news of Georgie's may promise the approach of a more felicitous and bountiful era. Perhaps it would be well if I were to indulge in a short stroll about the neighborhood and seek confirmation of this most auspicious rumor." Father was a Southern gentleman, and always talked like that. As he picked his way through the long neglected garden, the big brick house loomed up dark and lonely in the twilight. It looked very gloomy. No lights in the windows, no folks about. The roof shingles were curled and rotting. Blinds hung crookedly. In the walks and driveway, tall dried weeds rattled and scraped whenever a breeze stirred. Now that all the earth was stirring with spring, it seemed even more depressing. There had been a time, he remembered it wistfully, when things had been quite different here on the hill. The lawns then had been thick carpets of delicious grass, the fields heavy with clover. Garden vegetables had been plentiful. He and Mother and all their numerous offspring had lived well. All the little animals had lived well. There had been good folks there in those days. Children, too, who had played tag with them evenings, who had squealed with delight when mother skunks, their little ones strung out behind in solemn Indian file, had paraded across the lawn. There had been a dog, a lady spaniel, old and fat, who carried on endless noisy arguments with the woodchucks, but had never been known to harm anyone. In fact, she had once found a lost fox cub and nursed it and raised it with her own puppies. Let's see, that cub would be Foxy's uncle, or was it his father? He couldn't remember. It seemed so long ago. Then evil days had fallen upon the hill. The good folks had moved away, and their successors had been mean, shiftless, inconsiderate. Sumac, bayberry, and poison ivy had taken over the fields. The lawns had gone to crabgrass and weeds, and there was no garden. Last autumn even they had gone, leaving the empty house with its desolate black windows and its shutters flapping through the winter storms. He passed the tool house, where in the old days bags of seed and chicken feed had always rewarded the hungry field mice. It had been empty for years. Every grain of food had been searched out during the cold, hard winters. None of the animals ever went there any more. Porky, the woodchuck, was on the side lawn, hungrily snatching at the straggly patches of grass. His fur looked moth-eaten, and he was quite thin, a very different animal from the fat, waddling Porky, who last fall had squeezed himself down his burrow to sleep away the winter. Now he was trying to make up for lost time. After each mouthful, he would raise his head, look all around, and grumble, then snatch another mouthful. It made his grumbling come in short bursts. "Look at this lawn," he growled. "Just look at it. Gulp, gulp. Not a leaf of clover in it. Nothing but crabgrass and chickweed. Gulp, gulp. Time new folks was coming. Gulp, gulp. High time." He paused and sat up as father courteously greeted him. "Good evening, Porky. Good evening. It is indeed a pleasure to see you about again. I trust you passed a comfortable winter, and that this pleasant spring evening finds you in the best of health." "Dunno," grumbled Porky. "Health's all right, I guess. But I'm thin, as all get out, and how in tarnation's a fellow going to put any fat on his ribs with this stuff?" He waved disgustedly at the weed-choked fields, the patchy lawn. "Them last folks were slops. That's what they were, slops. Never done nothing, never planted nothing, never took care of nothing, let everything run down. Time they were gone, good riddance, I say. Time there was new folks coming, high time." "That is precisely the subject on which I wished to consult you," said father. "I have heard certain talk concerning the possibility of new arrivals, and wondered if you had any definite knowledge of the facts of the case. Is there any clear proof of this most desirable addition to our neighborhood, or is it mere hearsay?" "Hearsay, hearsay," said Porky a little doubtfully. He scratched his ear and spat thoughtfully. "Well, now, I'll tell you. I hear say as how that real estate fellow was up to the house 3 days ago with a couple of people, going all around inside and outside. I hear say as Bill Hickey, the carpenter fellow, was up here yesterday a-poking at the roof, and at the tool house, and the chicken house, and figures a bit of paper. I hear say as Louis Kernstock, the mason, was up here today, kicking and poking around them old stone walls, and them tumble-down steps, and figures too. And I hear say this, and this is important. He hitched himself closer and banged the ground with his paw. This is real important. I hear say as Tim McGrath, you know, the fellow in the cottage down to the fork, does plowing and planting and such. I hear say as he was up here this afternoon looking over the old garden, and the lawn, and the north field here, and he was figuring figures, too. Now what do you think of that? I think, said Father, that it all sounds extremely auspicious. There seems no doubt that new folks are coming, and all signs seem to indicate that they are planting folk. We could do well with some good planting folk hereabout. A nice field of bluegrass now. Father had come from Kentucky many years ago, and his talk of the bluegrass had become just a trifle tiresome. "'Twon't grow good here," Porky interrupted. "'Twon't grow good here in Connecticut at all. Myself, I could do with a good field of clover, and timothy though. I could do fine. Timothy and clover, and maybe some decent lawn grass, and a garden." His eyes grew watery at the thought. "Some beet tops now, and maybe some green peas, and a mouthful of verbena to top off with." He suddenly went back to his frantic tearing at the sparse grass patches. Father continued his stroll in a happier frame of mind. After all, times had been pretty hard these last few years. Many of their friends had deserted the hill. All their married children had sought other homes. Mother really was looking peaked, and seemed to worry more and more. New folks in the house might bring back the good old days. "Good evening, sir, and good luck to you," said the gray fox politely. "New folks coming, I understand." "A pleasant good evening to you, sir," answered Father. All indications seemed to point to that happy event. "I must thank you," the fox went on, "for taking those dogs off my trail yesterday morning. I wasn't in very good condition to deal with them. You see, I had been away up Weston way to bring home a hen. Pickings are pretty scarce hereabouts these days. 8 miles it is, there and back, and she was a tough old girl. She was sitting pretty heavy, and I was tuckered out when those dogs jumped me. You handled them very skillful, very, and I am obliged to you." "Not at all, my boy, not at all. Pray don't mention it," said Father. "I always enjoy a run to hounds. Brought up on it, you know. Why, down in the bluegrass country." "Yes, I know," said the fox hastily. "What did you do with them?" "Oh, just took them on a little romp down the valley, through a few briar patches, ended them up on that electric fence of Jim Coley's. Stupid brutes, though. Hardly could call it sport, very low class. Now down in the bluegrass country, the hounds were real thoroughbreds. Why, I can remember. Yes, I know, said the fox, melting into the bushes. Thanks, just the same, though. The gray squirrel was digging around rather hopelessly. He never could quite remember where he'd buried his nuts, and there had been very few to bury last autumn anyway. Good evening, sir, and good luck to you, said father. The good luck, however, seems to be what you most require. He smiled as he eyed the futile diggings. Your memory, old fellow, if you'll forgive my saying so, is not what it used to be. It never was, sighed the squirrel. Never could recollect where I put things. He paused to rest and looked out over the valley. I can recollect other things, though, real clear. Do you remember the old days when things were good here on the hill, when there was good folks here? Mind the tree the young ones always used to fix for us, come Christmas. That spruce over there it was, only smaller then. Little lights onto it, carrots and cabbage leaves, and celery for your folks, seed and suet for the birds. Used to dip into them a bit myself. Nuts, all kinds of nuts for us, and all hung pretty like on the branches. Indeed I do, said father. The memory of those times is deeply cherished by all of us, I am sure. Let us hope that the anticipated arrival of new folks may, in some degree, bring about a renaissance of the old and pleasanter days. New folks coming? Inquired the squirrel quickly. It is so rumored, and recent developments seem to indicate such a possibility. Good, said the squirrel, resuming his explorations with more energy. Hadn't heard of it, been too busy scrambling around. I've got the most forgetful memory. Willie Field Mouse galloped along to the end of the Mole Ridge and whistled shrilly. Mole, he shouted. Mole, come up. News, Mole, news. Mole heaved head and shoulders up out of the earth and turned his blind face toward Willie, pointed snout quivering. Well, Willie, well, he said, what's all the excitement? What news is news? News enough, Willie cried breathlessly. Oh, Mole, what news? Everybody's talking about it. New folks coming, Mole. New folks coming. In the big house, new folks. Everybody says they're planting folks, Mole, and maybe there'll be seeds again in the tool house. Seeds and chicken feed, and it'll fall through the cracks, and we'll have all we can eat all winter, just like in summer, and there'll be heat in the cellar and we can build burrows right against the walls, and be warm and snug again. And maybe they'll plant tulips, Mole, and scillas, and cheonodoxas. Oh, what wouldn't I give for a nice, crisp tulip bulb right now? Oh, that old bulb game. The Mole chuckled. I know. I do all the digging, and you follow up the burrow and eat the bulbs. That's fine for you, but what do I get out of it? Nothing but the blame. That's all I get. Why, Mole, said Willie, very hurt. Why, Mole, that's unfair of you. It really is. You know what pals we've always been. Always share and share alike. Why, Mole, I'm surprised. He was snuffling slightly. The Mole laughed and clapped Willie on the back with his broad, leathery paw. Come, come, he laughed. Don't be so everlastingly sensitive. I was only joking. Why, how could I get along without you? How could I know what was going on? How could I see things? What do I say when I want to see anything? Willie wiped away his snuffles. You say, Willie, be eyes for me. Of course I do, said the Mole heartily. I say, Willie, be eyes for me, and you are eyes for me. You tell me just how things look, and the size of 'em, and the colors of 'em. You tell it real good, too. Nobody could tell it better. Willie had lost his hurt now, and I do tell you when mole traps have been set, don't I, or poison put out, and when they're going to roll the lawn, though nobody's rolled this lawn in a long time. Of course you do. The Mole laughed. Of course you do. Now blow your nose and run along. I've got my dinner to get, and grubs are scarce around here nowadays. He ducked back into his run, and Willie watched the ridge lengthen slowly down the lawn, the end of it heaving and quivering with the mole's digging. He scampered down and rapped on the ground. Mole, he cried, I'll be the eyes for you when they come. I'll tell you real good. Of course you will. Mole's voice was muffled by the earth. Of course you will. And I wouldn't be surprised if there was tulips. Phuey, the skunk, stood up by the edge of the pine wood, looking down at the big house. There was a slight rustle, and the red buck appeared beside him. Good evening, sir, and good luck to you, said Phuey. New folks coming. So I understand, said the deer. So I understand, and high time too. Not that it matters, to me especially. I roam a lot, but things have been poorly here on the hill for some of the little fellows. Very poorly. Yes, you roam, Phuey answered, but you're not above a mess of garden sass now and then, are you? Well, no, not if it's right to hand, the buck admitted. He sniffed slightly. I say, Phuey, you wouldn't mind moving over a bit, would you? A little to the leeward. There, that's fine. Thanks lots. As I was saying, I'm fairly fond of a mess of greens, now and then, a row of lettuce, say, or some young cabbage, very young. The old ones give me indigestion. But of course, what I really crave is tomatoes. Are tomatoes. You take a nice, young ripe tomato now. You take it, interrupted Fewey. Personally myself, I don't care whether they're planting folks or not, except for the rest of you, of course. Gardens are nothing in my life. What I'm looking forward to is their garbage. You do have such low taste, Fewey, said the buck. By the way, the breeze seems to have shifted. Would you mind? There, that's fine, thanks. As I was saying, low taste nothing, answered Fewey indignantly. You just don't understand garbage. Now there's garbage and garbage, just like there's folks and folks. Some folks' garbage just ain't fit for, well, it ain't even fittin' for garbage. But there's other garbage now. You couldn't ask for anything nicer. I could, said the deer firmly, much nicer. By the way, just to change the subject, foxies rather counting on there being chickens, perhaps ducks even. That ought to interest you. Chickens is, all right, young ones, admitted Fewey, and ducks is all right, but to get back to garbage. Oh dear, the buck groaned. The winds changed again, and he backed into the woods. Deep down in the cold ground, where some frost still lingered, the old grandfather of all the cut worms uncoiled his dirty gray length and stretched his stiff joints. His voice was a hissing whisper, but it served to waken from their winter sleep all the thousands of his offspring. New folks coming, he hissed, new folks coming. Through all the sluggish mass, the sound spread. Slowly a quiver ran through their ugly forms. Slowly they uncoiled and began the long climb up through the clammy earth to be ready at the surface when the tender new plants should appear. So it went on all over the hill, through the bushes and the tall, unkempt grass. There was a continual stirring and rustling as the little animals rushed about, gossiping and speculating on the great event. The squirrels and chipmunks skittered along the stone walls, barking out the news. In the dark pine wood, the owl, the crow, and the blue jays argued over it loudly. Down in the burrows, there was a ceaseless coming and going of visitors, and above it all, the ever-recurring phrase, "New folks coming." Chapter 2. Mother Worries. Down in the rabbit burrow, Mother was worrying harder than usual. Any occurrence, good or bad, which upset the quiet order of Mother's days, always brought on a fit of worry, and of course the present great excitement had resulted in a perfect frenzy. She had thought of every danger or unpleasantness which might accompany the arrival of new folks, and was now inventing new and unlikely ones. She had discussed the possibility of dogs, cats, and ferrets, of shotguns, rifles, and explosives, of traps and snares, of poisons and poison gases. There might even be boys. She had repeated a horrid rumor which had circulated recently concerning a man who had attached a hose to the exhaust pipe of his automobile and stuck it down folks' burrows. Several families were reported to have perished from this diabolical practice. Now, father had reassured her. I have pointed out many times that their untimely fate was entirely due to their own negligence in allowing their emergency exits to become clogged with stored up foodstuffs. While a careful husbanding of food against the winter is a highly commendable custom, it is the height of folly to use one's emergency exit as a root cellar or a preserve closet. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, he went on, eyeing their own bare shelves and empty cupboards, our somewhat straitened circumstances of recent years have not permitted the accumulation of any great store of winter provender, so our exit has remained clear and in excellent repair at all times, although I must confess that you have occasionally exhibited an unfortunate tendency to clutter the passage with brooms, mops, buckets, and such unnecessary household implements. Just recently, I experienced an extremely painful fall out there. Mother had promptly removed the buckets and brooms and was somewhat comforted, but she still turned pale whenever the east wind brought a whiff of exhaust smell from some passing car. She had also thought up the possibility that the newcomers might cut down and plow up the thicket where the burrow lay. This, father admitted, was possible, but hardly probable. In such an event, he said, we should merely be forced to change our place of residence. Our present location down here in the hollow, although made dear through long association, is at certain seasons of the year indubitably damp, not to say wet. I have noted of late a slight tendency toward gout, a family inheritance, which might be greatly benefited by removal to a somewhat more elevated location. I have long had my eye on a site up near the pine wood, and should such destructive activities on the part of new folks necessitate a change of residence, it would, I believe, be not without certain advantages. Mother burst into tears at the thought of leaving the old home, and father hastily changed the subject to the possibility of cats and dogs. As for cats, he said, the whole matter is merely one of proper parental discipline. As you are aware, children should be heard but not seen, if they are kept indoors until large enough to properly take care of themselves. If they are taught to be always observant and alert, the danger from cats is practically negligible. The cat's capacity for sustained speed is laughable. Her only weapon is surprise, and if I may be pardoned for saying so, I believe I have been successful in teaching all our children to avoid ever being surprised. A few of the grandchildren, I regret to say, have been unduly pampered and allowed freedoms which were unknown in my day. The results of such parental indulgence have been swift and usually fatal. I hope my son, he said, sternly glancing at little Georgie, I hope the lesson to be learned from the untimely feline ends of our grandchildren, Minnie and Arthur, Wilfred, Sarah, Constance, Sarepta, Hogarth, and Clarence, will not be lightly passed over by you. Little Georgie promised that it would not. The mention of the little lost ones started mother crying again, so father continued. He always continued until something stopped him. In so far as I am concerned, dogs might well prove a very welcome addition to our community. Those country louts belonging to the fat man at the crossroads are scarcely worthy of a gentleman's attention. I would really relish an occasional chase with a couple of highly bred hounds. Why, down in the bluegrass country where I was reared. Yes, I know, mother broke in. I know about the bluegrass country. But there's Porky. He's one of your closest friends. Porky is a problem, father admitted. His foolish choice of a home site, right up there in the very shadow of the big house, was most unwise, as I have often pointed out to him. Of course, with the former tenants, it didn't matter. He could have lived in their parlor for all they cared. But with the advent of dogs, his present location would be dangerous in the extreme. Should the personnel of the incoming menage include dogs, I should have to take up the matter with him again and be very firm. But mother was having a good worry and refused to be distracted. There's the spring house cleaning, she fretted. I'd been planning to get at that this week, but what with all the goings-on, folks running in and out, there just doesn't seem to be a chance. And there's Uncle Arnaldus, him living way up in Danbury way, and Mildred married and left him all alone, and him getting old, and what a state his burrow is in, by now I can't imagine. I've been counting on asking him down for the summer, spite of the food shortage, but now with new folks coming, and dogs may be, and traps, and snares, and spring guns, or maybe poison, I just don't know. I just don't know. As a matter of fact, said father, I can think of no more propitious a time for your Uncle Arnaldus' visit, for several reasons. Item 1, he is, as you point out, extremely lonely since Mildred's departure, hence a change of surroundings will doubtless prove highly beneficial. Item 2, the food situation up Danbury Way is, I understand, even more acute than ours. Therefore, if our new folks turn out to be planting people, as we have every reason to expect, his situation in respect to edibles will be vastly improved. In short, he will eat good. Item 3. Uncle Arnaldus, being the oldest member of the family, now extant, has had many years of experience with man and his ways. Should our newcomers prove to be difficult people, which I do not anticipate, but it is always well to consider every eventuality, his advice and counsel will prove invaluable in dealing with such problems as might arise. Therefore, I should advise sending for Uncle Arnaldus at once. I would be delighted to go myself, were it not for the great number of pressing matters which will demand attention here during the next few days. This being true, the duty must fall to little Georgie. Little Georgie's heart leaped with excitement at the prospect, but he managed to lie quietly while Mother did a fresh bit of worrying, and Father allayed her fears as much as possible. After all, he was a pretty big boy now. He could run almost as fast as Father, and he knew most of the tricks. For the past few months, he had done all the marketing at the Fat Man's at the crossroads, had easily avoided the dogs, and crossed the Black Road safely twice each day. He knew the way to Uncle Arnaldus. They had all gone up for Mildred's wedding last fall. Why shouldn't he go? Of course he hated to miss a moment on the hill with all that was going on, but a trip clear up Danbury way was exciting, and he would only be gone 2 days. Nothing much could happen in that time. As he drifted off to sleep, he could hear Mother still worrying, and Father talking on and on and on and on. Chapter 3. Little Georgie Sings a Song. It was barely daylight when little Georgie started his journey. In spite of her worrying, Mother had managed to put up a small but nourishing lunch. This, along with a letter to Uncle Arnaldus, was packed in a little knapsack and slung over his shoulder. Father went along as far as the Twin Bridges. As they stepped briskly down the hill, the whole valley was a lake of mist, on which rounded tree tops swam like floating islands. From old orchards rose a mounting chorus as the birds greeted the new day. Mothers chirped and chuckled and scolded as they swept and tidied the nest. On the topmost branches, their menfolk warbled and shrilled and mocked one another. The houses were all asleep. Even the dogs of the Fat Man at the crossroads were quiet. But the little animals were up and about. They met the gray fox returning from a night up Weston Way. He looked footsore and sleepy, and a few chicken feathers still clung to his ruff. The red buck trotted daintily across the Black Road to wish them good luck and good morning. But Father, for once, had no time for long social conversation. This was business, and no rabbit in the county knew his business any better than Father. Few as well. Now, son, he said firmly, your mother is in a very nervous state, and you are not to add to her worries by taking unnecessary risks or by carelessness. No dawdling and no foolishness. Keep close to the road, but well off it. Watch your bridges and your crossings. What do you do when you come to a bridge? I hide well, answered Georgie, and wait a good long time. I look all around for dogs. I look up the road for cars, and down the road for cars. When everything's clear, I run across, fast. I hide again, and look around to be sure I've not been seen. Then I go on. The same thing for crossings. Good, said father. Now recite your dogs. Little Georgie closed his eyes and dutifully recited. Fat man at the crossroads. 2 mongrels. Good Hill Road. Dalmatian. House on Long Hill. Collie. Noisy. No wind. Norfield Church Corner. Police dog. Stupid. No nose. On the high ridge. Red farmhouse. Bulldog and setter. Both fat. Don't bother. Farmhouse with the big barns. Old hound. Very dangerous. And so on. He recited every dog on the route clear up to Danbury Way. He did it without a mistake, and swelled with pride at father's approving nod. Excellent, said father. Now do you remember your checks and doublings? Little Georgie closed his eyes again, and rattled off quite fast. Sharp right and double left and double right, dead stop and back flip, right jump, left jump, false trip, and briar dive. Splendid, said father. Now attend carefully. Size up your dog. Don't waste speed on a plotter. You may need it later. If he's a rusher, check, double, and freeze. Your freeze, by the way, is still rather bad. You have a tendency to flick your left ear. You must watch that. The high road is very open country, so keep in the shadow of the stone walls and mark the earth piles. Porky has lots of relatives along there, and if you are pressed hard, any of them will gladly take you in. Just tell them who you are, and don't forget to thank them. After a chase, hide up and take at least 10 minutes rest, and if you have to really run, tighten that knapsack strap, lace back your ears, put your stomach to the ground, and run. Get along with you now, and mind no foolishness. We shall expect you and Uncle Arnaldus by tomorrow evening at the latest. Little Georgie crossed the twin bridges in perfect form, returned father's approving wave, and was off on his own. It was gray and misty as he crossed Good Hill Road, and the Dalmatian still slept. So apparently did the collie up the road, for all was quiet as he plodded up Long Hill. People were beginning to stir as he approached Norfield Church Corner. Little plumes of blue smoke were rising from kitchen chimneys, and the air was pleasant with the smell of frying bacon. As he expected, the police dog rushed him there, but he wasted little time on that affair. Loping along with tantalizing slowness until they were almost on an old fallen apple tree buried in briars, he executed a dead stop, a right jump, and a freeze. The bellowing brute overran him and plunged headlong into the thorny tangle. His agonized howls were sweet music to little Georgie as he hopped sedately along toward the high ridge. He wished father had been there to see how skillfully he had worked and to note that during the freeze his left ear hadn't flickered once. The sun was well up when he emerged on the high ridge. On the porch of the red farmhouse, the fat bulldog and the setter slept soundly, soaking up its warmth. On any other occasion, little Georgie would have been tempted to wake them to enjoy their silly efforts at running, but mindful of father's instructions, he kept dutifully on his way. The high ridge was a long and open strip of country, very uninteresting to little Georgie. The view over miles and miles of rolling woods and meadows was very beautiful, but he didn't care especially about views. The brilliant blue sky and the bright little cream puff clouds were beautiful too. They made him feel good. So did the warm sun. But frankly, he was becoming slightly bored. So to ease his boredom, he began to make a little song. The words had been rattling around in his head for some days now, and the music was there too, but he couldn't quite get them straight and fitted together. So he hummed and he sang and he whistled. He tried the words this way and that way. He stopped and started and changed the notes around. And finally he got the first line so that it suited him. So Georgie sang that line over and over again to be sure that he wouldn't forget it when he started on the second line. It must have been this preoccupation with his song that made little Georgie careless and almost led to his undoing. He scarcely noticed that he had passed the house with the big barns, and he was just starting to sing his first line for the 47th time, when there came the roaring rush of the old hound right on his heels, so close that he could feel the hot breath. Instinctively, little Georgie made several wild springs that carried him temporarily out of harm's way. He paused a fraction of a second to tighten the knapsack strap, and then set off at a good steady pace. Don't waste speed on a plotter was father's rule. He tried a few checks and doubles and circlings, although he knew they were pretty useless. The great fields were too bare, and the old hound knew all the tricks. No matter how he turned and dodged, the hound was always there, coming along at his heavy gallop. He looked for woodchuck burrows, but there were none in sight. "Well, I guess I'll have to run it out," said little Georgie. He pulled the knapsack strap tighter, laced back his ears, put his stomach to the ground, and ran. And how he ran! The warm sun had loosened his muscles. The air was invigorating. Little Georgie's leaps grew longer and longer. Never had he felt so young and strong. His legs were like coiled springs of steel that released themselves of their own accord. He was hardly conscious of any effort, only of his hind feet pounding the ground, and each time they hit, those wonderful springs released and shot him through the air. He sailed over fences and stone walls as though they were mole runs. Why, this was almost like flying. Now he understood what Zip the swallow had been driving at when he tried to describe what it was like. He glanced back at the old hound, far behind now, but still coming along at his plodding gallop. He was old and must be tiring, while he, little Georgie, felt stronger and more vigorous at every leap. Why didn't the old fool give up and go home? And then, as he shot over the brow of a slight rise, he suddenly knew. He had forgotten Dead Man's Brook. There it lay before him, broad and deep, curving out in a great silvery loop. He, the son of father, gentleman hunter from the blue grass, had been driven into a trap that even Porky should have been able to avoid. Whether he turned to right or left, the loop of the creek hemmed him in, and the old hound could easily cut him off. There was nothing for it but to jump. This sickening realization had not reduced his speed. Now he redoubled it. The slope helped, and his soaring leaps became prodigious. The wind whistled through his laced-back ears. Still he kept his head, as father would have wished him to. He picked a spot where the bank was high and firm. He spaced his jumps so they would come out exactly right. The take-off was perfect. He put every ounce of leg muscle into that final kick and sailed out into space. Below him he could see the cream-puff clouds mirrored in the dark water. He could see the pebbles on the bottom and the silver flash of frightened minnows dashing away from his flying shadow. Then, with a breathtaking thump, he landed, turned 7 somersaults, and came up sitting in a clump of soft, lush grass. He froze, motionless, except for heaving sides, and watched the old hound come thundering down the slope, slide to a stop, and after eyeing the water disgustedly, take his way slowly homeward, his dripping tongue almost dragging the ground. Little Georgie did not need to remember father's rule for a 10-minute rest after a good run. He was blown, and he knew it, but he did remember his lunch, so he unstrapped the little knapsack and combined lunch and rest. He had been really scared for a moment, but as his wind came back and his lunch went down, his spirits came up. Father would be angry, and rightly, for he had made 2 very stupid mistakes. He had let himself be surprised, and he had run right into a dangerous trap. but that leap. Never in the history of the county had any rabbit jumped Dead Man's Brook, not even father. He marked the exact spot and calculated the width of the stream there, at least 18 feet. And with his rising spirits, the words and the notes of his song suddenly tumbled into place. Little Georgie lay back in the warm grass and sang his song. New folks coming, oh my, new folks coming, oh my, new folks coming, oh my, oh my, oh my. There weren't many words, and there weren't many notes, and the notes just went up a little and down a little, and ended where they began. Lots of people might have thought it monotonous, but it suited little Georgie completely. He sang it loud, and he sang it soft. He sang it as a paean of triumph, a saga of perils met and overcome. He sang it over and over again. Red-bellied robin, flying northward, paused in a sapling and called down, "Hi, little Georgie, what are you doing way up here?" "Going to fetch Uncle Arnaldus. Have you been by the hill?" "Just left there," Robin answered. "Everybody's excited. Seems there's new folks coming." "Yes, I know," cried little Georgie eagerly. "I've just made a song about it. Wouldn't you like to hear it? It goes like—" "No thanks," called Robin, getting along, and he flew on. Not in the least discouraged, little Georgie sang his song a few times more, while he strapped on his knapsack and took up his journey. It was a good song to walk to, so he sang it as he tramped the rest of the high ridge, as he went down the windy hill and circled around Georgetown. He was still singing it in the late afternoon, when he got clear up Danbury way. He had just finished "Oh My" for the 4,000th time, when a sharp voice from the bushes broke in with "Oh my what?" Little Georgie whirled. "Oh my goodness," he cried. Why, it's Uncle Arnaldus." "Sure is," the voice chuckled. "Uncle Arnaldus, as ever was. Come in, little Georgie, come in. You're a long way from home. If I'd been a dog, I'd got you. Surprised your old man ain't learned you more care. Come in anyhow." Although Mother had worried about the state of Uncle Arnaldus' home, with no feminine hands around to keep things neat, she could never, in her most pessimistic moments, have pictured anything quite so disorderly as the burrow to which little Georgie was welcomed. It was a man's home. There could be no doubt about that. And while little Georgie rather admired the bachelor freedom of the place, he was forced to admit that it really was extremely dirty, and the fleas numerous and active. After his day in the open air, the atmosphere indoors seemed stifling and not at all fragrant. Perhaps it was the sort of tobacco that Uncle Arnaldus smoked. Little Georgie hoped so. His uncle's cooking too, left something to be desired. Their supper consisted of one very ancient and dried-up turnip. After this meager meal, they sat outside, at little Georgie's suggestion, and Mother's letter was produced. "S'pose you read it to me, Georgie," said Uncle Arnaldus. "Seem to have mislaid them ding-blasted spectacles." Little Georgie knew that he hadn't mislaid them. In fact, that he didn't own any. He'd just never learned to read, but this formality always had to be gone through with, so he dutifully read, "Dear Uncle Arnaldus, I hope this finds you well, but I know you are lonesome with Mildred married and gone away, and we are hoping you will spend the summer with us, as we have new folks coming, and we hope they are planting folks, and if they are, we will all eat good, but they may have dogs, or poison, or traps, and spring guns, and maybe you shouldn't risk your life, although you haven't much of it left, but we will be looking forward to seeing you anyway. Your loving niece, Molly." There was a postscript, which said, "P.S. Please don't let little Georgie get his feet wet." But Georgie didn't read that out loud. The idea, he, little Georgie, who had jumped Deadman's Brook, little Georgie, the leper, getting his feet wet. "Well now," cried Uncle Arnaldus, "well now, that's a real nice letter, real nice. Don't know but what I will. Certainly is ding-blasted lonesome round here now, with Milly gone and all. And as for food, of all the carrot pension, stingy folks I ever see, the folks around here is the stingiest carrot pensionist. Yes, sir, I think I will. Course new folks comin' may be good, and it may be bad. Either way, I don't trust 'em. Don't trust old folks neither. But with old folks, you can tell just how much you can trust 'em, and with new folks, you can't tell nothing. Think I'll do it, though. Think I will. Does your ma still make that pea vine and lettuce soup as good as she used to?" Little Georgie assured him that she still did, and wished he had a bowl of it right then. "I've made up a song about the new folks," he added eagerly. "Would you like to hear it?" "Don't think I would," answered Uncle Arnaldus. "Sleep anywheres you've a mind to, Georgie. I've got a few knick-knacks to pack up, and we'd ought to get an early start. I'll wake you." Little Georgie decided to sleep outside under the bushes. The evening was quite warm, and the burrow was really pretty strong. He hummed his song as a lullaby now, and it was a good lullaby, for before he'd finished it, the third time, he was sound asleep. Chapter 4. Uncle Arnaldus. They started early, for Uncle Arnaldus really was getting quite elderly, and had to travel at a leisurely pace. What he lacked in speed, however, was more than made up by his craft and intimate knowledge of the countryside. He knew every path and short cut, every dog and every hiding place. All day he instructed little Georgie in the tricks of the rabbit trade, about which he knew almost more than father. They kept to the shadow of the stone walls and hedgerows. They circled wide around every house that possessed dangerous dogs. When they paused for rest, it was always within one leap of a burrow or briar patch. They stopped for lunch at Deadman's Brook, and little Georgie, with pardonable pride, pointed out the exact spot where he had jumped it. They even found the deep footprints that marked his landing. Uncle Arnaldus eyed the broad stream with a shrewd and practiced eye. "Quite a leap, Georgie," he admitted. "Quite a leap. Your old man couldn't do it. Couldn't have done it myself. Not even in my prime. Yes, sir, quite a leap." "Shouldn't let yourself get surprised, though. Shouldn't let yourself get driven into a no-fix like that, neither. No, sir. That was plumb careless. Don't think your old man'll like that." Little Georgie was sure he would not. The lunch was a very poor one indeed, for it consisted of the scrapings of Uncle Arnaldus' larder, never too bountiful at best. But the sun was warm, the sky was blue, and the old gentleman seemed inclined to rest and discourse. "Do you know, Georgie," he said, settling back comfortably in the deep grass, "that there song you've been a-singing at all day, it ain't much of a song and it ain't much of a tune, but there's real good sense to it, though you probably don't know it, and I'll tell you why, because there always is new folks comin', that's why. There's always new folks comin', and always new times comin'. Why, look at this here very road we're a-travellin' along. I mind my grandfather tellin' me how his grandfather told him how his grandfather used to tell about the old days, and how the British red-coat soldiers come a-trampin' up this road, clear up Danbury way, a-roarin' and a-shootin' and a-burnin' of the houses and the barns and the crops, and how the folks hereabouts come a-rampagin' and a-shootin' of them, and a lot of them was buried right in these here orchards, and all the homes was gone, and all the critters, and the food was gone, and they was bad times then, real bad. But them soldiers went away, and them times went away, and there was always new folks comin', and new times comin'. Us folks just went on a-raisin' our young ones, and attendin' to our own affairs, but new folks kept a-comin', and after a while this here whole valley was full of little mills and factories, and all them fields there along the high ridge was growin' thick with wheat and potatoes and onions, and folks was everywhere, and the big wagons a-rumblin' and a-rollin' along this very road, just a-spillin' out grain and hay and all. Them was good times for everybody. But then pretty soon all the young men folks went a-marchin' down this here road, all of 'em wearin' blue uniforms, a-singin' and a-laughin' and carryin' paper sacks of cookies and flowers stuck into their guns. Most of them never come back, and the old folks petered out or went away, and the mills fell in, and the fields growed up in weeds, and then it was bad times again. But Granddad and Grandmammy just went on a-raisin' us and tendin' their own business. And then there was new folks comin' again, and black roads, and new houses, and schools, and automobiles, and first thing you know, it was good times again. There's good times, Georgie, and there's bad times, but they go, and there's good folks, and there's bad folks, and they go too, but there's always new folks comin'. That's why there's some sense in that song you keep a-singin', though it's real tedious otherwise, real tedious. I'm goin' to take a nap 10 minutes. Keep your eyes open. Little Georgie kept his eyes open and his ears cocked. He wasn't going to be surprised again. He started to think about the things that Uncle Arnaldus had told him, but thinking always made him sleepy, so he washed his face and paws in the stream, packed up their knapsacks, and watched the shadow of a twig on the bank. When it showed that a full 10 minutes had elapsed, he woke his uncle, and they continued on their way. Word of Uncle Arnaldus' departure had spread among the little animals up Danbury Way, and many of them came out along the roadside to wish him good-bye and good luck. The woodchucks, too, along the high ridge, all wanted to send messages to Porky, so it was late afternoon when they tramped down Long Hill toward the Twin Bridges. They were tired and hot and dusty now, and as they approached the North Branch, Uncle Arnaldus seemed to have something weighty on his mind. While they rested on the bank of the stream, he suddenly unburdened himself. "Georgie," he burst forth, "I'm a-goin' to do it. Yes, sir, I'm a-goin' to do it. You know women folks is funny-like, and particular about some things, and your ma is extra particular. I dunno how many ding-blasted years it is since I've done it, but I'm a-goin' to do it now." "Do what?" asked little Georgie, puzzled. "Georgie," said Uncle Arnaldus solemnly, "listen careful now, because you may never hear me speak these words again in your whole life. Georgie, I'm going to take me a bath." Clean, refreshed, and slicked up, they hastened toward the hill, little Georgie almost running in his eagerness to be home. Even from a distance, it was clear that things had happened in his absence, for on the roof of the big house shone patches of bright new shingles, and the air was fragrant with the smell of pine shavings and fresh paint. They were greeted joyfully by Mother and Father, and while Uncle Arnaldus settled his few knick-knacks in the guest room, little Georgie burst into an account of his adventures. Father, of course, was quite angry at his carelessness in allowing the old hound to surprise him, but became so swollen with pride over the great leap across Deadman's Brook that he was less severe than he might have been. "And, Mother," little Georgie went on excitedly, "I've made a song. It goes." Father raised his paw for silence. "Listen," he said. They listened. and at first little Georgie heard nothing. Then suddenly the sound came to him. All over the hill, the voices of the little animals were rising in a chorus, and they were singing his song, the song of little Georgie. Way up near the house, he could hear Porky's unmusical bellow, "New folks comin', oh my!" He could recognize the voices of Phuey, of Red Buck and the Gray Fox, the piping treble of Willie Field Mouse, and all his brothers and sisters rose like a tiny, faraway chime. Oh my, oh my! He could hear the mole's muffled voice coming up from the sod. Mother hummed it as she bustled about, preparing dinner. Even Uncle and Aldous, sniffing happily at the soup pot, chimed in with an occasional cracked, "Oh my!" Bill Hickey and his carpenters were just leaving, and as their truck rattled down the drive, little Georgie could hear them all whistling his tune. At the cottage down the road, Tim McGrath hammered happily at his tractor, getting it in shape after the long winter's idleness. His plow was all cleaned and polished. His harrow lay ready, and as he worked he sang a song. "Where did you get that song?" asked his wife, Mary, from the kitchen window. "Don't know," said Tim. "Oh my, new folks comin', oh my, new folks." "And it's a good thing," interrupted Mary. "It's a good thing new folks are comin', after the winter we've had, and not much work and all. It's a good thing." "Comin', oh my, plenty of work now," he cried. "Garden to be made, big garden, lawns done over, north field plowed and seeded, wood cut, brush cleared, drive fixed, shrubs moved, chicken run, lots of work. Oh my, new folks comin', oh." "I don't think that's much of a song," said Mary, "but it's a good thing." Nevertheless, a few minutes later, above the rattle of the supper dishes, Tim could hear her not unmusical voice crooning contentedly, "Coming, oh my, new folks coming, oh my." Louis Kernstock, the mason, was loading his truck. As he threw in towels and buckets and hammers, shovels, hoes, cement bags, and all the other things he would need tomorrow, he hummed, much off tune, but very happily. It would have been hard to tell what the notes were, and the words were indistinct too, but it sounded like "Folks coming, oh my, new folks coming." Down at the corner store, Mr. Daly was arranging his shelves and ordering new stock. He didn't need to order much, for it had been a long, hard winter. Few people had been about, and his shelves were almost as full as they had been last fall. But now winter was over. Through the open door the first warm air of spring crept softly in. From the swamp the peeper frogs clamored like jangling sleigh bells. Mr. Daly sat on his high stool and scratched at his list, and as he wrote he sang a little songs. "New folks, coffee 2 dozen, corned beef 12, comin' oh my, new folks, starch 3 cartons, matches pepper, cornstarch salt, ginger ale coming, oh my, new folks coming, paper napkins, vinegar dill pickles, dried apricots, oh my, oh my, oh my."